During my first therapy session, the psychiatrist read my intake form. He went completely rigid and looked at me with pure terror. "You're describing memories from my childhood that no one should know." Dr. Graham Whitfield's hands started shaking as he held the clipboard with my intake paperwork. The pen he'd been holding clattered onto his mahogany desk, and his face went from professional neutrality to bone-white terror in the span of 3 seconds. I sat across from him in the leather chair that smelled like old books and watched his eyes scan the pages again like he'd misread something the first time. He looked up at me, and his voice came out strangled when he asked where I'd gotten this information. I told him I didn't understand what he meant. These were my memories from childhood. Dreams and fragments I'd been having for months that prompted my general practitioner to refer me for psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Whitfield stood up abruptly, knocking his coffee mug sideways. Dark liquid spread across his desk calendar, but he didn't seem to notice. He asked me to repeat what I'd written in Section 7 of the intake form about the yellow house with blue shutters. I said it was from recurring dreams I'd been having since last April. A yellow house in what looked like rural farmland. A tire swing in the front yard. A specific crack in the driveway shaped like a lightning bolt. Dr. Whitfield's breathing got rapid and shallow. He said that house was real. He'd grown up there until he was 9 years old in a town called Millbrook Falls, 300 miles from here. No photographs of it existed online. His parents had sold it 30 years ago, and it had been demolished to make room for a shopping center. There was no way I should know what that house looked like. I'd been experiencing strange dreams and intrusive memories for 8 months when my doctor finally convinced me to see a psychiatrist. I was 32 years old, worked as a mechanical engineer for an aerospace company, had a stable life with my girlfriend Vanessa in a quiet suburb of Seattle. No history of mental illness, no trauma, no drug use, just a normal guy who started having vivid dreams that felt more like memories than dreams. They'd begun small, flashes of places I'd never been, faces I didn't recognize. Gradually, they intensified until I was having full sensory experiences of events I couldn't have lived through, smells and sounds and emotional reactions that felt too detailed to be imagination. Vanessa had been worried when I started waking up disoriented, talking about things that made no sense. A yellow farmhouse. A woman named Dorothy with red hair who made blueberry pancakes. A dog called Max, who died when someone backed over him in the driveway. Details that felt true, but couldn't be mine because I'd grown up in Seattle in an apartment building with my single mother. Never lived in a farmhouse. Never knew anyone named Dorothy. Never had a dog named Max. My doctor ran tests. MRI showed normal brain structure. Blood work showed nothing unusual. He said it might be stress-related and referred me to Dr. Graham Whitfield, a psychiatrist with 23 years of experience treating anxiety and dissociative disorders. The intake form had asked me to describe my earliest memories and any recurring dreams or intrusive thoughts. I'd filled it out honestly, describing the yellow house, the tire swing, the crack in the driveway, Dorothy's pancakes, Max's death, the way rain sounded on that particular metal roof, the smell of hay from the barn next door, specific sensory details that had been flooding my mind for months. Now Dr. Whitfield was staring at me like I'd confessed to murder. He asked how old I was when these memories started. I said 8 months ago. He asked if I'd ever been to Millbrook Falls. I said I'd never heard of it until he mentioned it just now. He asked if I knew anyone from there, anyone who might have described the house to me. I said no. He sat back down slowly and pulled out his phone, started scrolling through something with trembling fingers. Then he turned the screen toward me. It showed an old photograph, clearly from the 1980s based on the color quality, of a yellow farmhouse with blue shutters. Tire swing in the yard. The exact house from my dreams. He asked if this looked familiar, and I felt my stomach drop because yes, it looked exactly familiar. Down to the specific shade of yellow paint and the way the shutters hung slightly crooked on the left side. Dr. Whitfield said that photo was from his mother's personal collection, never digitized, never shared publicly. He'd only taken this phone picture last year when going through her belongings after she passed away. I asked how this was possible, and he said he didn't know, but he needed to cancel our session immediately. Needed time to think about what this meant. I said I'd come here for help, not to be dismissed, and he said he understood, but this situation was beyond his current ability to process professionally. He'd refer me to someone else. I stood up feeling angry and confused, asked if he thought I was lying, if he thought I'd somehow researched his childhood to play a prank. He said no, he believed I was experiencing these memories genuinely, which was exactly what terrified him. He asked me to leave his office and said he'd call me within a week with a referral. I left the building feeling worse than when I'd arrived, drove home in a daze trying to make sense of what had happened. Vanessa was waiting with dinner and asked how the session went. I told her the psychiatrist recognized my dreams as his own childhood memories. She stopped stirring the pasta and looked at me like I was joking. When she realized I wasn't, she asked what that meant. I said I had no idea. She suggested maybe it was coincidence. Maybe lots of farmhouses looked like that. I showed her the photo Dr. Whitfield had shared with me before I left, a picture he'd texted to my phone as proof he wasn't dismissing me without cause. Vanessa looked at it, and then at me, and asked what we were going to do. I said wait for his call, I guess. Dr. Whitfield called 3 days later, but not with a referral. He asked if I could meet him somewhere neutral, not his office. Said he'd been doing research and needed to ask me more questions. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a Saturday morning. He looked like he hadn't slept much, ordered black coffee and sat across from me in a corner booth away from other customers. He pulled out a notebook and asked me to describe everything I remembered about the yellow house and the people who lived there. I described Dorothy, who I somehow knew was his mother, even though he'd never mentioned her name. Described his father, George, who worked at a grain mill and came home smelling like wheat dust. Described a younger sister named Caroline, who had a speech impediment and carried a stuffed rabbit everywhere. Dr. Whitfield's face went through several emotions as I talked. He confirmed every detail was accurate. Asked me to describe specific events. I told him about the time Caroline fell through the ice on a pond behind the property in February. How Dorothy had screamed and George had run out in his undershirt to pull her out. How they'd warmed her by the fireplace while waiting for an ambulance that took 40 minutes to arrive because they lived so far from town. Dr. Whitfield's hands were shaking again. He said that event had never been discussed publicly. Caroline had nearly died but recovered fully. Their parents never talked about it afterward because it had been too traumatic. The only people who knew were family members and the paramedics who responded. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. He asked if I'd ever undergone experimental medical procedures, any brain scans or neurological studies, anything involving memory or consciousness research. I said no, nothing like that. He asked about my family history, whether I'd been adopted, whether there might be connections I didn't know about. I said my mother was still alive, living in Tacoma. I'd never been adopted. Never had reason to question my origins. He asked if I'd allow him to contact some colleagues, specialists in neuroscience and consciousness studies, who might have insights into this phenomenon. I agreed, because I wanted answers as badly as he did. Over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Whitfield arranged consultations with 3 different specialists. Dr. Claudia Brennan was a neurologist with 18 years researching memory disorders at Stanford Medical Center. She examined me thoroughly, ran another MRI with more detailed imaging, conducted cognitive tests and memory assessments, found nothing abnormal. She said my brain showed no signs of damage, disease, or unusual structure. My memories seemed to be encoded normally. She had no medical explanation for why I was accessing someone else's childhood experiences. Dr. Raymond Kepler was a neuroscientist at the University of Washington with 16 years studying consciousness and neural networks. He interviewed me for 3 hours, asking detailed questions about the quality and clarity of these foreign memories. He said they appeared to have the same characteristics as genuine autobiographical memories rather than false memories or confabulations. The level of sensory detail and emotional content was consistent with real experienced events. The third specialist was Dr. Iris Volkov, a psychiatrist who'd spent 22 years researching dissociative identity disorder and rare consciousness phenomena. She was particularly interested in the timeline, asked me to pinpoint exactly when the memories started. I said the first dream occurred on April 3rd of the previous year. I remembered the date because it was Vanessa's birthday, and I'd woken up disoriented from the dream about the yellow house, nearly forgot to take her to dinner. Dr. Volkov asked what I'd been doing in the days before that first dream. Any changes to routine, any unusual experiences, any new medications or substances. I thought hard and remembered I'd participated in a sleep study at the University Medical Center, a research project recruiting healthy volunteers to test new sleep monitoring equipment. I'd seen a flyer at my gym offering $200 for 1 night in a sleep lab. Had signed up thinking it was easy money. Dr. Volkov's expression sharpened. She asked which medical center, which research group. I gave her the details I could remember. She said she'd look into it and asked me not to discuss the sleep study with anyone else yet. Something about her tone made my skin crawl. I asked if she thought the sleep study had something to do with this, and she said it was too early to say, but the timing was suspicious. Dr. Volkov called me 4 days later and asked me to come to her office immediately. When I arrived, she had Dr. Whitfield there along with Dr. Brennan and Dr. Kepler. All 4 of them looked grim. Dr. Volkov explained that she'd investigated the sleep study I'd mentioned. The research project had been shut down abruptly in May, 1 month after I'd participated. The principal investigator, Dr. Anton Reeves, had been dismissed from the university under circumstances that were sealed by legal agreement. His research had involved experimental neurotechnology supposedly for monitoring sleep patterns, but Dr. Volkov had found concerning references in academic networks, rumors of unauthorized experiments involving memory transfer and consciousness bridging. Nothing proven but enough smoke to suggest serious ethical violations. She'd tried to contact Dr. Reeves, but his current whereabouts were unknown. She'd filed an inquiry with the university's research ethics board. They were stonewalling her, said the matter was closed and legally protected. Dr. Whitfield asked if I remembered anything unusual from my night in the sleep lab. I tried to recall details. Standard sleep lab setup. Electrodes attached to my head for EEG monitoring. The technician had said they were testing new sensor technology. I'd fallen asleep normally. Woken up in the morning feeling fine. Collected my payment and left. Nothing seemed wrong at the time. Dr. Kepler asked if anyone else had been in the sleep lab that night. I said yes, there had been other volunteers in separate rooms. I didn't know how many or who they were. Dr. Volkov said she needed to contact authorities because if Dr. Reeves had been conducting unauthorized experiments on human subjects, that was a serious crime. She knew someone at the FBI who specialized in medical fraud and ethical violations. I asked if she really thought this was necessary, and she said absolutely. If my memories were transferred from Dr. Whitfield somehow, without consent, that constituted assault at minimum. Potentially worse, depending on what methods were used and what damage might have been done. She made the call while we sat there. Spoke to someone named Agent Fiona Cross, who apparently specialized in cases involving experimental technology and medical crimes. Agent Cross said she'd look into it and would contact me directly. 3 days later, Agent Cross showed up at my apartment. She was a woman in her mid-40s with 15 years at the bureau according to her credentials. Asked if she could record our conversation. I agreed. She had me describe everything from the sleep study to the emerging memories to the moment Dr. Whitfield recognized them. She took detailed notes and asked specific questions about Dr. Reeves, the sleep lab setup, any paperwork I'd signed. I said I'd signed a consent form but hadn't kept a copy. She said the university would have records. She'd subpoena them. Asked if I'd experienced any side effects beyond the memories. Headaches, cognitive issues, personality changes. I said no, just the intrusive memories that weren't mine. She asked if I'd be willing to testify if the investigation led to criminal charges. I said yes, if it meant getting answers. Agent Cross worked quickly. Within 2 weeks, she'd gotten the university to turn over records from the sleep study. 17 volunteers had participated in April, including me and Dr. Whitfield. I felt my reality tilt when she told me that. Dr. Whitfield had been there the same night I was, in a different room, participating in what he thought was legitimate sleep research. Neither of us had known the other was there. The consent forms we'd signed had included language about experimental neural monitoring technology, but nothing about memory transfer or consciousness experiments. Agent Cross said that constituted fraud at minimum. She'd located Dr. Reeves living under a different name in Oregon. He'd been brought in for questioning, initially denied everything. Then, when confronted with evidence, admitted his research had gone beyond approved parameters. He'd been testing a technology he called neural bridge networking, claimed it was designed to help trauma patients by allowing therapists to experience their memories directly for better treatment. But the technology was unstable, and he'd known it. The university had discovered what he was doing and shut him down before he could publish results or face proper oversight. Agent Cross said Dr. Reeves was being charged with multiple counts of fraud, unauthorized human experimentation, and assault. The case was complicated because the technology actually worked, which raised questions about consent and ownership of memories that legal frameworks weren't prepared to handle. Dr. Whitfield and I met several times to discuss what this meant for us. We'd been connected by an illegal experiment neither of us had agreed to. His childhood memories had been copied into my brain through technology that shouldn't have been used on human subjects. He was dealing with the violation of having his most private experiences stolen and implanted in a stranger. I was dealing with carrying memories that weren't mine, couldn't be removed, and fundamentally changed my sense of self. We both felt violated, but in different ways. He asked if I resented him for this, and I said no, he was a victim too. Asked if he wanted me to somehow suppress the memories. I said I didn't know if that was possible, but I'd try if it would help. He said he didn't know what would help. We were both grieving something neither of us fully understood, the loss of clear boundaries between our identities, the knowledge that consciousness wasn't as private or protected as we'd believed. Agent Cross kept us updated on the investigation. Dr. Reeves had admitted that the neural bridge networking had connected all 17 volunteers in his study that night, creating a web of shared consciousness that allowed memories to transfer between subjects while they slept. Most volunteers experienced only fragments or didn't notice anything unusual, but a few, like me and Dr. Whitfield, had strong transfers. She said there were at least 3 other victim pairs who'd reported similar experiences, people suddenly having memories from strangers they'd never met who'd been in the sleep lab the same night. The case went public after 6 months of investigation. Media coverage was intense, headlines about illegal memory experiments and consciousness theft. Dr. Reeves became the center of ethical debates about neurotechnology and human rights. Some people argued he was a pioneer being persecuted for advancing science. Others called him a monster who'd violated the sanctity of human consciousness. I gave interviews carefully, trying to explain what it felt like to carry someone else's childhood in my head, how I could remember Dorothy making pancakes with the same emotional warmth Dr. Whitfield felt even though I'd never met her, how I grieved when I remembered Max dying, even though he wasn't my dog. The memories felt real and false simultaneously, true experiences that weren't mine. Dr. Whitfield gave fewer interviews, but the ones he did were powerful. Talked about the violation of having his privacy invaded at the most fundamental level, having his memories stolen and distributed without consent. He'd stopped practicing psychiatry temporarily because the situation had shaken his sense of professional boundaries too deeply. We both testified at Dr. Reeves's trial. The courtroom was packed with media and other victims. Dr. Reeves showed no remorse, said his research was important and the university had shut him down prematurely, said the technology could revolutionize treatment for PTSD, depression, and other conditions if people would stop being afraid of progress. The judge was not sympathetic, found him guilty on all counts, sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison plus restitution to victims. The university settled with all 17 volunteers in a class action lawsuit, paid substantial damages, and implemented new oversight protocols for research involving human subjects. But money didn't fix what had been done, didn't remove the foreign memories from my brain, or restore the privacy stolen from Dr. Whitfield. We continued meeting occasionally, not as doctor and patient, but as people connected by shared trauma. He told me stories about the real Dorothy and George and Caroline. I told him what it was like experiencing his childhood from the inside. We helped each other process the impossible situation we'd been forced into. Vanessa stayed with me through everything, said she loved me regardless of whose memories I carried, that I was still myself even with someone else's past layered into my consciousness. I wasn't sure that was true, but appreciated her saying it. Dr. Volkov continued treating both of us for the psychological impact, said we were navigating territory psychology had no map for, the ethics of consciousness and identity in an age where memories could be transferred technologically. She wrote papers about our case with our permission, helped establish new frameworks for understanding and protecting cognitive autonomy. Dr. Whitfield eventually returned to practice but changed his focus, started specializing in helping victims of neurotechnological crimes, a field that barely existed before our case but was growing as similar incidents emerged elsewhere. 3 years later, I've adapted to living with dual memory sets. The foreign memories have integrated into my consciousness in ways that feel less jarring now. I still remember the yellow house and Dorothy's pancakes and Max's death with vivid clarity, but I've accepted they're part of me even if they didn't originate with me. Dr. Whitfield says he's made similar peace with knowing a stranger carries his childhood, says it bothered him less over time when he realized I treated those memories with respect, understood their significance to him even though they were just data transferred into my brain by illegal means. We've become something like friends through this process, connected by shared experience even though the sharing was forced and wrong. Other victims from the sleep study have had varied outcomes. Some integrated the foreign memories easily. Others struggled with identity confusion and needed extensive therapy. 2 required psychiatric hospitalization when the cognitive dissonance became too severe. Dr. Reeves serves his sentence and still insists his work was important, still believes the ends justified the means. I testified at his parole hearing arguing for denial, said he showed no understanding of the harm he'd caused and couldn't be trusted with freedom or research access. Parole was denied. He'll serve the full 8 years. Maybe by then, legal frameworks will exist to properly punish what he did. Maybe not. The technology he created was seized and supposedly destroyed, but I suspect similar research continues in labs that learned from his mistakes. The idea of neural bridge networking and memory transfer is too tempting for some researchers to abandon, too potentially profitable for certain interests to ignore. We were just the first public victims, probably won't be the last. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Dr. Whitfield and I wrote a book together about our experience, published 2 years ago to modest success. We wanted to document what happened before the details faded from public attention. Wanted to warn people about the risks of participating in research studies without understanding exactly what's being tested. Wanted to advocate for stronger protections for cognitive autonomy and consciousness rights. The book found an audience among people interested in ethics, neuroscience, and privacy rights. We do speaking engagements sometimes. Tell our story to university classes and medical conferences and legal symposiums. Always emphasize the same points. Consent matters. Privacy matters. The inside of someone's mind is sacred space that shouldn't be violated for any reason. No scientific advancement justifies what Dr. Reeves did to us. Some audiences get it. Others are more interested in the technology than the violation. Ask questions about how the memory transfer worked mechanically, rather than focusing on the ethical catastrophe. Those audiences frustrate me, but Dr. Whitfield says education is a process. We keep telling the story, and hope it makes some people think harder about the implications of neurotechnology before it's too late. The legal settlement money helped, but couldn't compensate for what was taken. You can't put a price on cognitive autonomy or the sanctity of personal memory. Can't undo the violation once it's done. We live with it. Build new normal around it, find meaning where we can. Sometimes I wonder what Dorothy would think if she knew her pancake recipe lives in the mind of a stranger in Seattle. Whether George would be angry that his wheat dust smell is remembered by someone who never met him. Whether Caroline would feel exposed knowing her near drowning is carried by a consciousness that wasn't there. Dr. Whitfield says they'd probably be horrified but also understanding. His family was like that, compassionate even when things were hard. I wouldn't know personally, but I remember them that way through his memories, so maybe I do know in some sense. That's the confusion we live with, where his experiences end and my knowledge of them begins, whether remembering something makes it mine or if some memories can only ever belong to the person who lived them first. Philosophy and psychology don't have clear answers. We're making it up as we go. The technology outpaced our understanding, and now we're stuck in the gap trying to figure out what it means to be human when consciousness isn't as private as we thought. When the boundaries between minds can be breached with the right equipment and the wrong intentions. We're survivors of a crime that barely has a name. Victims of theft that stole nothing physical but violated us more deeply than any conventional assault. And we're witnesses to a future where this might become common if we don't establish stronger protections now. That's why we keep telling the story, why we keep testifying and writing and speaking, because we were first, but we don't want to watch others experience what we did. Don't want to see consciousness become just another resource to be exploited and commodified. The Yellow House is gone, demolished decades ago, but it lives in two minds now where it only belonged in one. That's what progress looked like without ethics. That's what happens when brilliant people decide their work matters more than consent. We remember, both of us, and we won't let anyone forget what that cost. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.